In today's video, we're going to talk about bar graphs and pie charts. So we have a few terms to discuss before we actually construct those types of graphs. Our first definition is about class. Class is one of the categories into which qualitative data can be classified. The class frequency is the number of observations in the data set that fall into a particular class. So the class relative frequency then is the class frequency divided by the total number of observations in the data set. So in some of our data today, we're going to be given a table perhaps, or just a list of numbers, and we'll talk about how to calculate class frequency, class relative frequency, and also class percentage. So once we know the relative frequency, we simply multiply by 100 and that will tell us the class percentage. So a bar graph will take our categories or classes of the qualitative variable and represent them using bars, where the height of each bar is either the class frequency, class relative frequency, or class percentage. The other type of graph we'll talk about in this video is the pie chart. The pie chart categorizes the classes of qualitative variables and represents them with slices of a pie. So we'll be working with circles today, and remember the size of each slice needs to be proportional to the class relative frequency. So if you have some larger percentages that you're working with, make sure that your 45% slice is going to be a wider slice than your 2% slice. So just keep that in mind. Alright, so to practice, our first example, we are given a table with A, B, and C. So this is qualitative type of data. The qualitative variable with three classes, A, B, and C, are measured for each of 20 units randomly sampled from a target population. The data, which is our observed class for each unit, are as follows. For part A, compute the frequency for each of the three classes. So I've got class A, B, and C. And frequency is simply the count. So all I do is go back to the data set and count how many A's are given. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So our frequency of A is equal to 7. Class B, count all the B's. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The frequency for class B is 8. And finally, class C, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the frequency for class C is equal to 5. Now that we know the frequency, we can compute the relative frequency. So for A, we're going to have 7 out of a total of 20, because back in the narrative it told us that there were 20 units randomly sampled. And we could go back and count all those data values. So 7 divided by 20 will be equal to 0.35. And for B, we had 8 out of 20, so 8 divided by 20 is 0.4. And finally, class C, 5 out of 20 is equal to 0.25. And now we have a relative frequency. Part C asks us to display the results from Part A in a frequency bar graph. So it's a frequency bar graph because Part A, we were just calculating the frequency of each class ABC. So to draw our bar graph, I'm going to have each class represented for the horizontal axis, A, B, and C, and I'll use frequency for my vertical axis. Now I'm looking at the numbers 7, 8, and 5 to give me an idea of what kind of interval to use or what to count by, starting with 0. So I think I will count by 2's. And for class A, I need to have a bar that is 7 units tall. For class B, I need to have a bar 8 units tall. Finally, class C is 5 units tall. And now I have my frequency bar graph. Insert a title, frequency bar graph, and since we don't know what these classes represent, my title isn't much more detailed than that. Part D asks us to display the results from Part B in a pie chart. So I'll insert a circle, or I could draw a circle. Here's my circle, and I'm going to mark the center of the circle as a reference point to draw my slices. And I need to have 3 slices in my circle because I have 3 different classes of data. So let's see, looking at 0.35, 0.4, and 0.25, I recognize 0.25 as being 1/4 of the circle. So I think I'll start with wedge C, 1/4 of the circle, 0.25. Now I'm writing in the relative frequency because we're displaying the results from Part B, and those are the relative frequencies. All right, next is 0.35, so that would be just a little larger than 0.25. So 0.35 represents class A, and that leaves class B at 0.4 for the final wedge. And we notice 0.25 is the narrowest wedge and it is the smallest relative frequency. 0.4 is the largest wedge and also the largest relative frequency. So make sure that you're keeping in mind how wide or narrow to make your wedges. It should be in accordance with the relative frequency that you calculate. And we could give a title to our pie chart, and we'll label this pie chart class relative frequency. So the 2 major concepts to understand from this video are that frequency tells us a count of our data, and relative frequency takes that count, divides by the total to give us the decimal form, which we will later translate into class percents.